Okay, first a little review about where we are. We're talking about executive power under Article 2. The President is the, here's my crazy dog again, the President is the Commander-in-Chief and the Chief Executive of the United States government. So, you got to know Youngstown, first of all, right? That's your general framework for analyzing executive power. You know you're being tested on executive power. There are a couple different possibilities. The most common fact pattern would be an executive order, right? The President issues an executive order. Please watch out for that red flag. If you see that, you have to cite Article 2 of the Constitution and you have to cite the Youngstown case. Remember the 3 zones that come from Justice Jackson's concurring opinion in Youngstown. Zone 1 is explicit or implicit authority to do something. Zone 2 is basically lack of guidance from Congress, and Zone 3 is evidence of congressional disapproval. You decide which zone you're in. That determines whether the President's power is at its maximum or its minimum. If you wind up in Zone 2, where there's either no guidance from Congress or there's conflicting laws on the books, then you look at a couple of factors. Number 1, is it foreign policy or is it domestic policy? And number 2, what's the history, right? Do we have a history of allowing presidents to do that without a whole lot of problem? Now, what's left under executive power is basically a more nuanced issues, kind of sub-issues, and the first one we're going to talk about is appointment power. Under the Constitution, the President has the power to appoint officers of the United States. So, first of all, the question is, what is that? An officer of the United States is a high-ranking official in the executive branch or in a quasi sort of executive position. We'll talk more about that in a minute. An officer of the United States, because let's put it this way, there are millions, I think around 2 million people who work for the federal government. The President obviously cannot appoint every single person who works for the federal government, or the President would do nothing else, right? And even then couldn't possibly get it done. So what the President has to appoint are officers of the United States. So basically we're talking about high-ranking executive officials, right? High-ranking people in the executive branch. Let me throw some language at you, right? Make sure you got this in your notes. An officer of the United States is somebody who exercises considerable authority, right, under the United States. So we're talking about people like cabinet secretaries. If you're not familiar with what a cabinet secretary is or cabinet departments are in the federal government, you really need to get on Google and look that up and take a survey. There's right. Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, Department of Defense, Department of Education, Department of Treasury, Department of Transportation, right? Obviously the heads of those departments, which are called the cabinet secretaries, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, etc., those have to be appointed by the President. People lower than that, right? Certain kinds of undersecretaries also have to be appointed by the President. These are referred to as political appointees, right? They're appointed by the President. In addition to having departments at the federal level, under the department level, we often have something called agencies, right? For example, the FBI is an agency that operates under the Department of Justice, right? Or they call it a bureau, but that's the same thing. The Environmental Protection Agency, right, is an agency that operates under a federal department. So the heads of these agencies also have to be appointed by the President. The way I think about this, if this helps at all, think about whether this person could call the White House switchboard and actually get the President on the phone, right? If you work for the government and you can get the President on the phone, you might be an officer of the United States. If you work for the federal government and you'd be laughed at if you asked to talk to the President, then you're probably not an officer of the United States. Okay, now, those people, if you're at that level, need to be appointed by the President. The question, the fact pattern you're looking for is not hiring. The fact pattern you're looking for is firing, right? That's how this is usually tested. And a purely executive officer of the United States, and I'm going to put up a slide about this, and differentiate between the two here. A purely executive officer of the United States, somebody whose job, right, resides only, right, solely in the executive branch. If you're an officer of the United States and you're a purely executive officer, you can be fired by the president without cause, and that makes sense. The president can't be forced to work with people who have lost his trust. Jim Comey, the former FBI director, once famously said, "I understand the president can fire me for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all," and that's right. Why? Because Jim Comey was an executive officer of the United States, right, purely in the executive branch. Here's what to look out for. Every now and then, excuse me, you know me and my throat clearing. Every now and then, Congress will create something called a commission. Some commissions are standing, and some commissions are ad hoc, which, again, look this stuff up, Google it if it's problematic. Ad hoc means, right, it comes and goes, right, it's temporary, basically. We've think about things like the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Sentencing Commission, you might have heard of some of those things, the Commission to investigate the JFK assassination, or if you're old enough to remember, the 9/11 Commission, right? Those latter two, the JFK assassination and the 9/11 Commission, were ad hoc commissions. They weren't there forever. They were there to deal with a specific incident or occurrence in our history. So, okay, watch out for the words commission or commissioner. Please watch out for that on your Common Law 1 exam. Watch out for that on the bar exam. Commissions are different than federal departments or federal agencies. Commissions are designed to be somewhat independent, right? If you look at the three branches of government, right, you can look at them at three bubbles. There may be a little overlap, but yeah, the judicial branch, legislative branch, and executive branch. Most federal departments and federal agencies fall neatly within the circle that says executive branch, right? Commissions fall outside the executive branch, but the problem is they don't fall inside, right? Either one of the other two, nice and neatly. Why would, for example, the 9/11 Commission, why would Congress create a commission rather than an agency? Well, first of all, because it's ad hoc, but that's not the real point. The real point is they want these commissioners to have some independence from the executive branch, right? Congress wants commissioners to investigate, to take the investigation wherever it goes, and if that means to the White House, then so be it. So these commissions are often created, right, not to be purely within the executive branch, but to either investigate or to advise, right? Could be the executive, it could be courts, it could be Congress, right, who the commissioners are supposed to advise. So, when Congress creates a commission, it can, now the commissioners are officers of the United States, those are high-ranking, the commissioners themselves are officers of the United States, they're very high-ranking officials. So you would think then they could be fired by the president without cause because they're officers of the United States. But note, I've been saying if you're a purely executive officer of the United States, you can be fired by the president without cause. If you're a commissioner, courts refer to them as quasi-legislative or quasi-judicial. Because they're there to some extent to investigate or advise the executive, but they may also be there to advise Congress. They may actually really kind of work for Congress. The Federal Sentencing Commission is there to work with courts as well. So these, I call them floating, right? These commissions that are floating, right, between or among the three branches, two or three branches of the federal government. Again, those are independent officers of the United States. Now, so as to these commissioners, Congress is allowed to require that the president not fire a commissioner except for cause. Meaning you have to have some reason, right, to fire this person. You can't just fire them because they've lost your trust. However, the Supreme Court has also said that Congress is not allowed to dictate to the president what constitutes cause. That's why I have on the slide the question, does the exception swallow the rule? Now, Congress doesn't have to require cause, right? But Congress may require cause for the president to fire a commissioner, right? A quasi-legislative or quasi-judicial officer of the United States who's, again, in any fact pattern, it's going to be some kind of commissioner. So Congress doesn't have to require cause, but it may. However, it may not. It may not dictate to the president what constitutes cause, because the court says that's an executive decision. Look, so the president may need cause to fire a commissioner if Congress decides the president needs cause, but the president's allowed to make up what constitutes cause. So, I mean, theoretically, the president could say, well, the person looked at me the wrong way and I find that to be cause. You know, the only reason we really even go through this stuff is because it's testable on the bar exam, but it's kind of a silly rule. Okay, so let's review. As to appointments, the president must appoint officers of the United States. I should have said this at the beginning. An officer of the United States also requires Senate confirmation, right? But I think that's sort of common knowledge. Again, look that up if you need to, right? Like judges. So, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and and if it's an executive officer, if it's a purely executive officer, it can be fired by the president without cause. If it's a quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial officer, that you know the fact pattern. The red flag for that is commissions. If it's a commissioner, the president can fire, but the Congress can require cause if it wants to, but the Congress cannot tell the president what constitutes cause. So that's appointments in a nutshell. If you know that, you should be fine getting through that kind of question. Back with the next video soon.